Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. What exactly happened when a Delta Air flight crashed at Toronto's International Airport yesterday? And why does there seem to have been a recent string of airline accidents? We'll talk to an aviation safety expert. And the BC Throne speech is this afternoon. Already we have seen a grocery rebate canceled, a freeze on public sector hiring. Just how big will the Trump effect be on BC's fiscal policies? After 12:30, we'll take your calls on off-leash dogs at parks. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Delta Airlines Flight 4819 was landing at Toronto's Pearson Airport, coming from Minneapolis just after 11 a.m. Pacific yesterday, when it crashed, caught on fire, and then flipped over onto its back. Incredibly, all 76 passengers and 4 crew members survived and escaped. 21 went to hospital with injuries and 19 have since been released. Following the crash, we know 2 of the runways will be closed as the investigation continues. And Greater Toronto Airport Authority President Deborah Flint said this morning that the airport will be in recovery mode for the next 2 days.
We do expect that the investigators on site will be reviewing the aircraft on its current configuration on the runway for the next 48 hours. And we are looking to get to support that investigation and the removal of that aircraft off the runway, at which point we can do our inspections and then return that runway into service. Toronto Pearson will continue to provide you all with operational updates, but this is now an active investigation time.
Now, Flint says all arrivals and departures on the airport's 3 other runways were immediately halted. They will be reopened by 5 p.m. later in the day. Well, joining me to talk about this now is Hassan Shahidi. He's CEO of and president of the Flight Safety Foundation. That's an independent nonprofit that works to promote aviation safety. Hassan, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
The footage of this is just unbelievable. What goes through your mind as you've been watching it?
It really is unbelievable how this happened. And we're first of all very thankful that there were no fatalities on this one. As you reported, there were some injuries, but no fatalities. And, this is going to be a thorough investigation by the Canadian authorities to look at all of the factors that may have contributed to this accident and really have a deep understanding of what exactly happened. Clearly, there were some weather challenges yesterday with blowing snow as well as gusting winds up to 40 miles an hour. But also the investigators will be looking at the profile of the approaching aircraft with the speed and the landing, which appeared to be, from the videos that we've seen, a hard landing that resulted in the failure of the right landing gear.
Physically, what might cause a plane like that to, as you say, take a hard landing and then flip over?
Well, first of all, the CRJ is an excellent airplane, well engineered, and as we were seeing in the videos, the fuselage is intact, and that is absolutely really goes to the great engineering of Bombardier, who built this, and Mitsubishi now owns that fleet. But certainly the engineering that's gone into this airplane, as well as the material that is used in this airplane, all of that really great contributor to the outcome that we had yesterday.
The CRJ, the Bombardier Canadair regional jet. And I have heard from previous interviews that the fact that it flipped over and the wing actually broke off is something that was lucky?
Yes, indeed, because the wing, of course, holds the fuel. And the fact that the wing came apart after contact with the runway, that was certainly a factor in the survivability of this crash. But there are other factors that certainly we should note. One is that the passengers were wearing the seatbelts. You can see from the videos that they're all strapped in upside down. If they weren't wearing seatbelts, they would have been thrown around resulted in severe injuries, possibly fatalities. So I think that was a very important thing. Those seatbelts saved lives yesterday.
So, as investigators start looking into this, will this be more of an issue looking at the airport conditions then?
I think there will be a number of factors that the investigators will be looking at. It will be a comprehensive investigation by the Canadian authorities. They'll be joining with the US NTSB in a partnership, but they will have the lead in investigating many factors, including the weather conditions, certainly as we discussed with the winds and the blowing snow, but also the profile and the speed of the aircraft. The black boxes will be recovered. Those black boxes are going to be crucial in the investigation because they will have very good information and data that will really show the profile, the speed, and the performance of the aircraft. So all of that will go into the investigation, and they will determine the likely causes and contributing factors.
When when I heard this, I just thought, this is yet another airline incident. There has been a spate of these incidents in recent times. There was a deadly midair plane collision, of course, in Washington, D.C. last month. Should anyone be worried about this?
Well, certainly this is a concern. Anytime the passengers and flyers see these incidents and accidents that happen in such a short period of time, and they question, is it safe to fly? Can I take my family on a trip? These are understandable concerns. But we also need to note that in 2024, we had nearly 9.5 billion passengers fly globally by air. We have thousands of aircraft that depart and land every day without any incidents. We have trained pilots, trained air traffic controllers who are doing their jobs very well. And so we do have a safe air transportation system. That said, these incidents and accidents are absolutely of concern, and investigators will be looking at the likely causes of these accidents, which are, by the way, independent of each other, right? They have nothing to do with each other.
Sure.
And they will determine the likely causes and contributing factors and making sure that these don't happen again.
So is it a matter of perception then that we're just paying attention to this news, or proportion? Are we looking at proportionately a higher number of crashes, at this time of year?
Well, statistically, fatal accidents rates are very, very, very low. But those statistics really are no comfort to passengers who see these videos, these news about these crashes that have happened over just a short period of time. And so I think that's completely understandable. But it's important to note, again, that we have a safe air transportation system. When you look at it holistically, we have regulators that are being vigilant in terms of making sure that they have the right oversight. We have investigators who are now, trying to find out the likely causes. And so moving forward, I would just say that from flying, in the system, there should be no worries. We have a good safety system that we have in place.
Hassan Shahidi, very good to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hassan Shahidi is CEO and president of the Flight Safety Foundation. That's an independent nonprofit that works to promote aviation safety. It's 12:15 Pacific time. And many are calling it miraculous that there were no on-site fatalities at the crash when the plane flipped on its back. And here's what the fire chief had to say about how they found the passengers when they attended the crash.
Upon arrival, the crew did witness spot fires. They were able to quickly knock down the spot fires using the aircraft rescue firefighting apparatus. Once the fires were knocked down, the crews did make entry and perform primary search and rescue. The passengers were all evacuated, and then they were taken to a secondary location at Station 2 for triage with our mutual aid partners.
We've seen videos of the passengers hanging upside down in their seatbelts. Can you maybe just describe what it was like to get these people, hanging, cut down, and out of the plane?
I believe that most of the passengers self-evacuated at that time, and upon arrival, they were being escorted to a second location.
That is Todd Aitken, the fire chief for the Greater Toronto Airport Authority. And as I've said, there are investigators looking into this now. It will be over the next 48 hours at Pearson International Airport. As well, U.S. officials say they are also helping with the investigation. That's the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board said on social media that it is assisting with the investigation. However, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the TSB, is leading the probe, and they are looking again into details as to what may have caused this crash. Much more on this story, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. This is BC Today, and coming up in just over an hour from now at 1:30, BC's new Lieutenant Governor Wendy Kochia will deliver the throne speech, kicking off this session of the Legislature. You can watch that live on CBC's YouTube channel, on our website, cbc.ca/BC, on CBC Gem and CBC News BC. Now, MLAs are returning at a very uncertain economic time. Donald Trump's threatened tariffs still loom over the province, with an apparent deadline coming up in a few weeks. And there has already been bad news. BC's finance minister announced last week she is canceling that promised $1,000 grocery rebate, as well as freezing hiring in the public service. We're asking you, how do you feel about that grocery rebate being canceled? And what do you think will be the Trump effect on BC's fiscal policies? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined by Marc Lee, senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives BC office. Marc, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon, Michelle.
Well, first, what do you think of the grocery rebate being canceled late last week by the finance minister, Brenda Bailey?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a tricky one for the provincial government. I always thought that the grocery rebate was kind of an election gimmick. Doug Ford is using the same thing, and the federal government before Prime Minister Trudeau resigned was also talking about the same kind of thing. So, essentially bribing people with their own money, $500 for individuals and $1,000 for families. The total fiscal cost of that fully phased in was close to $2 billion per year. So I think for a government that's in a situation now where a lot has happened since we had our election in October 2024. It's taken 4 months to get to a throne speech. This is really the first sign of policy coming from the BC government. So that's a pretty long time to wait. And in the interim, of course, we've had the prime minister resign, the Trump tariffs looming over our head, and a lot of uncertainty about the overall economic situation. And the bigger context for that is a slowing economy even before the Trump tariffs due to demographic and various other factors. So personally, I think that not going ahead with the grocery rebate is a good idea. We're going to need that firepower should the Trump tariffs start to manifest, particularly the sectoral tariffs they promised around steel and aluminum. BC doesn't produce steel, but we do produce a lot of aluminum, and there's 1,500 jobs up in Kitimat tied to that sector. So to the extent that we can use that fiscal firepower for more targeted sectoral measures, that's probably the right thing to do, although it does mean breaking an election promise.
Right. Now, you said 4 months ago. Has it really just been 4 months? It feels like a lifetime with all the news that's happened. Yeah. But if I cast my mind back to that, and we, you do the same, it brings up the point that the NDP very narrowly won a majority. And so they have this very large opposition coming in as well that they're going to have to deal with. How do you think that might affect the dynamics and the decisions that they do make?
Yeah, I mean, if we roll back the clock a little bit, the big story through 2024 was the rise of the Conservative Party. The election was the most razor thin majority one could imagine, and that led to some negotiations between the NDP and the Greens towards supporting the new mandate from this government. Overall, the platform that the NDP tabled back in the fall wasn't particularly ambitious, and the two signature items in it were the grocery rebate, which we just talked about, is now off the table, and then there was this other pilot project around mortgages, where the government would take up essentially 40% of a mortgage.
Right.
Or 5,000 homes over the next few years. So some of the details about how that is going to play out, particularly in terms of the housing market that has evolved in some challenging ways. So, even going back to, well before the Trump tariffs and before the U.S. election, the top issues facing British Columbians were housing, healthcare, and affordability. And in spite of the overall slowing economy and the uncertainty caused by the Trump tariffs, those still remain core issues for the vast majority of British Columbians. So I think what we want to see in today's throne speech is some signals that the government is listening, that they are prepared to implement measures that are going to address those. And then we'll see in 2 weeks' time, when the BC budget is tabled, what kind of real commitments in terms of dollars and cents are backing those.
Let's put out our numbers once again, asking you, first of all, yes, as you heard, one of those election promises, the grocery rebate, $1,000 has been canceled by the finance minister, saying we are heading into a time of real uncertainty as the legislature begins its next sitting. Asking you about that, and what do you think will be the Trump effect on BC's fiscal policies? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. My guest is Marc Lee, senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives at the BC office. And Marc, you just suggested that or touched on the need for the province to be able to support the aluminum sector, keep going with housing measures, affordability measures. The province ran a record deficit, right? Reported a record deficit last year, 9.4 billion. So do you expect that to grow as BC tries to stir up activity, support local sectors in the face of those threatened tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We had a fiscal update back in December, which pointed to about a $9 billion deficit. That's pretty large, even though BC's economy is about $400 billion. The good news is that our overall level of debt relative to GDP, which is the metric that most economists are looking at, is still very healthy, and one of the healthiest among all of the provinces in Canada, save for Alberta, which is of course special because of oil and gas. So there is capacity for the BC government to run a larger deficit if necessary. I mean, if the impact of the Trump tariffs are very severe, we would expect both federal and provincial governments to lean into that to prop up demand through having larger deficits.
I can already hear Conservative opposition MLAs really voicing concerns about that.
Well, I mean, the thing you don't want to do when the economy is turning down is cut government spending or try to arbitrarily reduce the deficit just to say that you could at the end of the fiscal year. These all have impacts on households. And when investment is down and consumption is down, good economics, says that, government needs to take up the slack. We shouldn't be thinking about government like we do as a household. When times are tough, households tighten their belts. In fact, it's the opposite for governments. That's when governments need to lean into that to support that. Now, we can do that in different ways. In particular, I think we should be looking at strategies that are investing in the things that we already want to do, things around like meeting our climate change obligations and the energy transition that we need to be making, investing in things like non-market housing and keeping the level employment in that sector high. Transportation investments, particularly public transit, a huge demand for that. And there was some interesting alignment between the NDP and Greens around new transportation investments that would be, the ideal to bring in at this time when the economy is turning down.
Let's take a call from Wendy up in Prince Rupert. Yeah, your thoughts on how the BC next legislature sitting will be affected by the threatened tariffs from Donald Trump, Wendy?
Oh, well, the tariffs, yeah, for sure. I'm just calling to talk about the cancellation of the $1,000.
Yes.
Yeah, I just feel that for people living below the poverty line, they should definitely still receive that, or at least part of it. That's all.
Okay, so tied to income then, means tested. Bring it back, but means tested. Wendy, thank you very much. Yes, talking about people who will be affected, still struggling with affordability. Is there room for something like that then, Mark, do you think? Not an across-the-board rebate or, not for everybody, but something that's just for people who are living below the poverty line?
Yeah, I think absolutely. We should definitely be thinking about targeted measures that help people who are in the most difficult circumstances. At this particular time, although it makes, or made for good politics back in October, I don't know that we necessarily need to be giving $500 or $1,000 to people who are earning over $100,000 per year. So again, taking that $2 billion that was going to go into the grocery rebate and thinking about targeted measures, whether there's sectoral measures in areas like aluminum or other sectors that get hit by the Trump tariffs or whatever ultimately comes of that, as well as addressing poverty and the affordability crisis that's affecting so many households in BC. I think that makes a lot more sense.
What are the tough decisions, do you think, that are in front of the BC government right now?
Well, I think it's hard to table a budget with so much uncertainty on the horizon. Even just your baseline estimates of how this is going to affect our provincial GDP, we don't really know. And I think that maybe is part of the intention of the Trump administration, to keep everybody on edge. No one really knows where that's all going to go. And we can anticipate where some of the impacts might be, but the overall dampening that this puts on the investment climate in BC is pretty significant. If companies are not going to move ahead with an expansion plan because they're not clear that there will be a market for what they're producing 6 months from now, or even just in general, like there will be a tendency for businesses to put off major investments or think about where the location of that investment is going to be. So all of those, I think, are weighing on the overall provincial budget. And at the same time, we know what some of the pressing challenges are for the BC government. And we can't just be overly focused on what Donald Trump is doing. We need to think about what are the kind of core challenges that are facing our province and what's the role of the provincial government to try to ameliorate those for a large proportion of the population.
We'll look to see what is in the throne speech and, as you said, in the budget coming up in a couple of weeks as well. Mark, always good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. Take care.
You too. Marc Lee is senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives BC office. It is just about 12:30. Now you're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you very much for joining us on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming as well. And as I mentioned, you'll be able to watch that throne speech with the Lieutenant Governor, Wendy Kochia, coming up in 1 hour from now. And that will be live on CBC's YouTube page, on CBC Gem, on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and as well as our streaming service, CBC News BC. Your host will be Benit Brage, coming up at 1:30. Right now it is 12:30 Pacific time for a CBC News update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Doctors for Safer Drug Policy say they will be conducting another pop-up overdose prevention site outside Royal Jubilee Hospital in Victoria today and tomorrow. The group has previously set up unauthorized sites to push the province to act on what it says is an unfulfilled promise to address drug use in hospitals. The federal government has reached an agreement with the city of Port Coquitlam to accelerate construction of nearly 300 homes over the next 3 years. Ottawa has committed more than $10 million to eliminate barriers. The government says the city's action plan commits to 7 local initiatives, including new affordable housing and infrastructure grant programs, the reduction of parking requirements, and expanded multifamily zoning. And as we've been hearing on the show, the BC Legislature is resuming with one of its first jobs to elect a speaker after New Democrats won a slim majority in the October provincial election. MLA Raj Chauhan, the speaker in the last government, was the only person to put his name forward this time around. The session starts this afternoon with a speech from the throne. And now the forecast on the north coast, mainly cloudy this afternoon with a high of 7. Highs around -18 with some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of -7. Highs from -3 to +2 with some sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, cloudy with a high of +1. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a chance of showers or drizzle this afternoon with highs around 9 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for being with us. We are live on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming as well. You can catch us on YouTube, on our website, and on the News app. Well, this week On the Coast is charting a course through more of the top stories in Metro Vancouver. So if you are in the Metro Vancouver region, here's what's coming up with Gloria Makarenko.
Hi there, it's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us for On the Coast this afternoon. We've got a fair bit in the works here in Vancouver. William Shatner is getting ready to come to Vancouver for Fan Expos. So we're going to speak with him on the show this afternoon. We'll talk about how this 3-year stint playing James T. Kirk about 60 years ago has turned into a lifelong legacy for the 93-year-old actor. I'm looking forward to that conversation. So I hope you can join us.
William Shatner, that's amazing. He's lived long and prospered, that's for sure. Looking forward to that, Gloria. That's coming up on the Coast for our listeners to CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver. Forgive me, I don't know much about Star Trek, so I'm trying really hard here. That's coming up this afternoon. .34 now here on BC Today. Well, a review of dog rules at Pacific Spirit Regional Park at UBC's endowment lands is breeding some debate over off-leash dogs. Right now, about 2/3 of the park's trail system is, quote, leash optional. But Metro Vancouver is engaging residents in a review about whether changes are needed. And some people have complained about the rules being confusing or about out-of-hand off-leash pups. Dog owners, though, say otherwise, and here's what some park users had to say.
Our son's dog, we've been bringing it here for 4 years. No problems, never seen any vicious dogs. The dogs like to run around and play, but I'd be very disappointed because there's not many off-leash places we can take the dog.
There are leash-required trails here and off-leash. So I think that if people obey them, I don't think there's an issue. I mean, this is a park that should be shared with everybody.
So I'm a big regular here. I've never seen any negative interactions between people and dogs, specifically off-leash or on-leash. So to me, I think the whole proposal seems to be from a minority rather than the actual wider population. Yeah.
On-leash trails start in the middle of nowhere, and so I think that the parks should work with the community of dog walkers. The signs could be bigger, they could be better, that could be thought out a little bit better.
All right. Well, conflict between off-leash dog owners and other park users, of course, isn't new. So we want to hear from you in this conversation today. Do you think dogs should be allowed off-leash at busy park spaces? Is there a safety issue? And are there enough public spaces for dogs where you live? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me for more on this is Laura Christiansen. She's a Vancouver Park Board Commissioner. Hello, thanks for coming into studio.
Hi, thanks for having me on today.
Well, first, can you tell us what is the role of the Vancouver Park Board in this review that's being run by Metro Vancouver?
Actually, the Vancouver Park Board isn't involved in Metro Vancouver's role, but we do have many dog parks through the city of Vancouver, and we advocate on behalf of Vancouver residents to have new dog parks in the city of Vancouver. So Metro Vancouver, which is all of the municipalities in the Lower Mainland, they're involved in the Pacific Spirit Park and reviewing the dog off-leash rules there.
Okay, so yes, that's what I wanted to be clear, is that you're separate from this process.
Yes.
So as someone who's involved in the management of other park spaces in Vancouver and, as you say, advocating for dog parks, what do you think of this debate?
It's a common debate. It's an ongoing debate. It's a very important debate. Dog owners are very passionate, and it's really important that we balance the needs of dog owners and dogs with people who might not like dogs. And it's going to be a conflict, and it's an important discussion that we have about how to balance those two user groups.
What do you hear from those two user groups?
So from dog owners, people want places to exercise their dogs. We have a lot of people living in apartments with dogs, and they need places to have their dogs to run around, exercise, socialize. So that's a really important part. And then we have people who might be, afraid of dogs. They're wanting to use parks for other reasons, whether that's sports fields or playgrounds or splash pads. And, they don't want necessarily to have dogs in those spaces, for safety reasons, or maybe they're just not comfortable around dogs. And I think we need to respect that.
Is there, though, I've gone on trails where there are off-leash dogs, and sometimes my daughter gets nervous around dogs, and so I keep that in mind. But I'm aware when I go to that space that that's going to be a place where we're going to run into dogs, or we go to specific trails where either there are no dogs allowed or they are not off leash. So is there a way that people can just abide by those rules so that everybody is able to live side by side?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really important that rules are clear and followed so that people know when to expect dogs and when not to expect dogs, kind of thing. So having areas that are designated as dog free, and then making sure that dog owners are respectful of those rules to keep those areas dog free for people who don't want to interact with dogs in that way. And then having areas that are designated as off-leash or leash-optional, for example, and making that really clear about the delineation of those spaces. So that dog owners know, okay, well, I can't have my dog running on the sports field, but there is a space over here that is, leash optional, and I can exercise my dog here, and providing those two different spaces for those two different user groups.
Is that the solution, do you think, clarity?
Yeah, clarity is critical, and whether that's, signage, physical delineation, and then education, and then obviously, at the last step, enforcement.
My guest is Laura Christiansen, a Vancouver Park Board Commissioner, and the review of the dog rules and off-leash dog rules at Pacific Spirit Regional Park is being conducted by Metro Vancouver. So we're asking you, because this is an issue that applies to so many people right around the province, asking you, should off-leash dogs be allowed at public parks and busy park spaces? Do you think there is a safety issue? Have you encountered one? And are there enough public spaces for dogs in your region? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. This has unleashed a lot of calls. Eric is on the line in Vancouver. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I come from the perspective of the better part of 40 years, gosh, maybe closer to 50 years in parks management in BC. I introduced the first dog waste bags in West Vancouver in 1991. Of course, that trend has thankfully led to most dog owners picking up after their dogs. But I've seen over the last 5 years, maybe even a bit more than that, the pendulum starting to swing, Michelle. I see non-dog owners being much more vociferous in their opposition to dogs. I see the degradation of the landscape, frankly, and Commissioner Christensen can attest to this. A huge amount
She's
of
nodding
money
her head,
put
yeah,
to
yeah.
acquisition and development of lands in the downtown area for dogs that within a year it's a mud pit and nobody can use it. Dogs can't use it. Dog owners don't go there. And the ecology, for example, at Pacific Spirit Park, seriously degraded. And
so is that an issue of maintenance, Eric?
Yeah. Well, yes, I think it does. I think that, of course, all of our parks need much higher levels of maintenance, but especially intensively used dog parks definitely need more attention than they're getting. That's pretty obvious. But even so, I mean, in the regional parks where dogs run free in a lot of areas and other municipal parks, the underbrush, the understory gets torn apart, birds get disturbed, the soil and the drainage patterns get disrupted. Waterways get disturbed during periods and egg hatch and so on.
Yeah.
I think that the pendulum is starting to swing.
So what do you think of that? Which is better? Do you think more what it was like before, or now that the pendulum is swinging, should there be more control over dogs then, or?
Well, it is really important for dog owners to get out and exercise. This is an important part of the spectrum of recreation opportunities out there.
Yeah.
But I do believe, it's my opinion, possibly not shared by everyone, that the landscape, the ecology, and the use of parks by people needs to be revisited, and that those users need to also be incorporated into the management schemes.
Really interesting point. Eric, thank you so much. Years of experience working in parks management. So he's talking there about the impact on the ecology.
Yeah. That's a really key thing to consider is that dogs, when they're off leash can impact nesting birds. They can, as you mentioned, digging up the understory. So causing, a spread of invasives, for example, is one potential impact. So, one thing that can happen is we delineate these, ecologically sensitive zones, providing some boundaries like fencing, for example, to keep dogs, out of a river, for example. So still having these areas for dogs to exercise, but separating them from sort of the ecologically sensitive zones and being careful and planning our areas so that we reduce the impact on the environment.
Our next caller is Robert at Brentwood Bay, and I think you wanted to talk about the impact on wildlife, Robert.
Yes, I think your former speakers said most of what I want to say. Parks are for recreation by people. And the dogs off leash, they chase the squirrels and kill them. They chase the birds and kill them.
Do they kill them?
Well, yeah, if they catch them.
Okay. That would be a concern. Yes, I just don't know. Have you heard of that?
Yes, of course I have.
Yeah. My apologies. Yeah, it's just I just wasn't sure to what extent that actually happens. And I imagine. So, what do you think would be a solution then? So, for dogs shouldn't be off leash.
They should not be off leash. No, they should be under control.
Okay.
I live near a public walkway here in Brentwood, and hundreds of dogs go by every day. And I hear a dog fight every week or so. But it's mostly, I have no problem with a well-trained dog being off leash, walking beside its master. But if the ones that are not trained, I've seen people with dogs on leashes, or the dogs are jumping around, they're totally out of control.
Okay. Robert, thank you very much. How much of a threat are dogs to wildlife? off-leash dogs?
I haven't heard any stories of squirrels being killed in our parks, for example. But, there are definitely areas, nesting birds are one very sensitive area. So there are some parks in Metro Vancouver that are actually closed to dogs for that reason, because there's, it's a very sensitive bird habitat. And so the decision was made that, okay, dogs are better off not in this park for the sake of the birds. And then having other areas that are, less ecologically sensitive, that dogs are allowed off leash.
Okay. Robert, thank you. Sandy is next now in Vernon. Hi, Sandy.
Hi. Thanks for bringing this topic up. I've got 2 dogs. I'm very involved in the dog community and spend a lot of time with my dogs and do dog sports. And my dog, my big dog, has had 2 major surgeries. So we go to on-leash parks and on-leash trails, but inevitably every single time encounter people with their dogs off leash, and it's a problem for us because they're approaching my dog and he wants to play. He's not reactive or aggressive, but it's not what he should be doing during his recovery. And when calling bylaw for reinforcement, they're limited hours, and I'm told that there's 2 people that patrol the 47 parks, I think, so they can't get to the places. And I think, talking to other dog people, it's a real problem. And when try to remind people that it's on leash only, get responses that are really rude.
Yeah, that puts you in a really tough position. Yeah.
It is really. So we're really limited to where we can go. And then I've had people tell me, well, try to remind people that there's lots of off-leash parks for them to go to. But I've had the response where, they're not safe places for their dogs. So they, that's not a good environment for them. So then they come to on-leash places and then take their dogs off leash, and it makes it not so pleasant for us.
Yeah.
And I do know people with reactive dogs and want to go to places that are on leash and then have off-leash dogs approach them, and then it, can be confrontational. So it's a real problem for us, and I know in the dog community here, and because there's no one policing or patrolling. So I don't know what the solution is, but yeah.
Yeah, it's the question of, and Sandy, do you find then, does this point to a need for more spaces?
I think education is a big one. And I think enforcement, signage at the on-leash. And like we have a city park that's beautiful and it's a multi-use park. And only recently we've been allowed to have on-leash dogs there. And again, go there and there's off-leash dogs because, people are kind of sneaking in and using it and I did have a friend that had their small dog at an off-leash park lose its eye. It got attacked. So people are starting to not go to on-leash parks or off-leash parks because there's a lot of dog fights, a lot of attacks. So now they're going to on-leash and taking their dogs off-leash, which creates more confrontation.
Yeah, that must go to dog behavior as well, I can imagine. Sandy, thank you very much. I mean, that's something that you raised, is that the last, resort would be enforcement, but as she's saying, there's a lack of it.
Yeah, definitely. Enforcement is something that is important, but is difficult to do. We have a lot of parks, we have limited resources, and ultimately people get upset when there's enforcement. But it is important. On the education front, it's not just education about what's on leash and off leash, but having the opportunity to educate dog owners about, okay, what is appropriate dog play? So you may have seen in the city of Vancouver, we've put up signage in our off-leash dog parks with education about, what does dog body language look like? What does it look like when your dog is being aggressive or when your dog is nervous? And what are some actions that you can take as a dog owner to address that, whether that's removing your dog from the situation and how to train your dog to be, a better dog friend in the dog park.
Yeah, because that seems to go, even beyond spaces into interactions and even human-to-human interaction if you're dealing with someone and they're not cooperating. Asking you, should dogs be allowed off-leash at busy park spaces? Is there a safety issue? Are there enough of these parks that allow for dogs to run off leash? 1-800-825-5950. And all of this is because of a review of the dog rules at Pacific Spirit Park at UBC's Endowment Lands. And our next caller is Stephen, who lives near Pacific Spirit Park in Vancouver. Hi, Stephen. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Yeah, I grew up, from age 1, half a block from the park. So I walked through it as a kid and as an adult, a few years with a dog. I cycle through it for commuting to and from school, university, and visiting family in the neighborhood and such as well. I've been chased by off-leash dogs a few times on the bike. Never been bitten, thankfully. I'm not a jogger or a runner. It's the one thing I haven't done in the park, and I've heard stories of those people being chased by off-leash dogs as well, or lunged at by even dogs on leashes can be a hazard to runners and cyclists and anyone who doesn't want to be jumped up on by a dog along extendable leashes and the like.
Right. So do you think it needs to change then? Would you like to see?
They have been making some changes over time. As to, which are leash optional, under voice control. They say, you have to have good control over your dog if you're going to let them go off leash. And that's not been the case with some that I've come across. The proposed, there are a few areas. I think weekends and statutory holidays, I'm looking at their map, there's a little area that's wheelchair accessible that they say no dogs at all. So for people who don't want to risk dealing with dogs, they've got a small little section where they can go on weekends and holidays that in theory there aren't supposed to be any dogs there. But mostly I think it's going to come down to enforcement, just because, as previous callers have said, there are people out there who just don't care, right, as to what the rules are. And they've improved. There's always been maps saying where you can and can't. Right. But more over the decades, they have improved their signage on the trails as well that show where leashes are not required or are required. So you don't have the excuse of not having picked up a map or not being able to figure out where you are on the map. But if staffing is a problem, I can see if they can confine it to a smaller area, it might be easier for them to enforce, would be the one reason for changing it.
It comes down to enforcement, whether they change the rules or not.
Well, for the few small groups that cause the problem. I mean, if you're trying to, I suppose, for all those people who do follow the rules, to different degrees, they are good or not good about training or controlling their dogs, but
it's the few that I guess the rest would say you're ruining it for the rest of us. Stephen, thank you so much. Great to hear your experience having lived near Pacific Spirit Park. Suzanne, let's head to the island now. Suzanne is on the line in Nanaimo, and there have been a lot of debate over this too. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, good morning. I haven't followed all the conversations, so there could be something double. But I find if you have public places where other people are, I would suggest always to have the dog on the leash, and that is just out of experience. The dog, the best dog that people say never will attack or never will scare a child or whatever, but that changes when they feel the fear in a child or a person that had a very traumatic experience with the dog, and they react totally different. And then you hear the owner say, "Oh, that never happened before, and that is so strange," blah 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 blah. But it is a fact. So I personally feel public places with children, please keep them on the line and keep them safe and away. And that is my
unpredictability.
Opinion. Yeah.
Suzanne, thank you. Good to hear from you in Nanaimo. And Tiffany is next now in East Van. Hi, Tiffany.
Hey there. I wanted to talk about Trout Lake and John Hendry Park. There is an off-leash area, but dog owners do not restrict themselves to it. And I've witnessed lots of terrorizing and stressing of water birds, including ducklings. And that's an important nesting and migration area. And there's just no enforcement. We've experienced trying to ask dog owners to please keep their dog leash and to stop chasing the wildlife. And people get very abusive, very angry. We've been screamed and yelled at on Mother's Day. I was informed by a retired parks ranger who witnessed one of these events, saying that actually, not only is there no enforcement for people having their dogs off leash, but this could include fines, because when dogs are chasing wildlife, that's actually technically unlicensed hunting. And also, even on the north side of the park, where there's dogs going in the water all the time in the off-leash area, that increases the coliform count in the lake. John Hendry is a really important east side beach and recreation area. There's picnicking. Yeah. And the dogs can't help it. It's the owners and the enforcement. And it's a really big problem. It's very sad to see.
Yeah, and we know about those coliform counts in Trout Lake. when we get them in the summer. Tiffany, thank you so much as well from your for your call from East Van. I haven't heard from any dog owners who do let their dogs run off leash. So if you'd like to just let us know your thoughts, you can email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Robin writes, I believe that there aren't enough dog parks for dog owners in Vancouver, and this is apparent from seeing how many people use other public spaces that aren't designated off-leash spaces. I understand most dogs and owners are great, but I've been chased and attacked by dogs multiple times while running the track at the local high school, unprovoked, and have now an involuntary trauma response to off-leash dogs. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Avis is writing, there are too many dogs. Dog owners like the idea of having a dog, but are too lazy to walk it on a leash. They want the dog to exercise itself off leash. They want to let it run loose so they don't have to pick up its dog feces. They degrade the landscape. And Susan writes, I go to Pacific Spirit Park every day with my dog. It's one of the few areas where I can walk my dog off leash. I believe if dog owners are responsible, there should be no problems. If you are a dog owner, anticipate what could happen. Leash your dog when it is appropriate, even if the trail is off leash. Well, I'm glad to hear from you as well, Susan, because that's a voice we haven't heard yet. I just have about a minute left here, but obviously people have lots of opinions on this. How do you go about this moving forward?
We're always soliciting feedback from the public on this. And one thing we're really focusing on is the planning of these dog areas. So one really important thing is to license your dog. Not only are the funds important, but we use that as a data collection tool to understand where are dogs in the city. We overlay that with population density, and that's how we plan where to put new dog parks, is based on that information. So license your dog, provide feedback, and we'll keep working on expanding dog areas.
And expanding enforcement, it sounds like, from what people
I've heard that,
calling for sure. So we'll watch for that from the Park Board and from Metro Vancouver. Laura, great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's Laura Christiansen, a Vancouver Park Board Commissioner. And we welcome more of your thoughts to BC Today at cbc.ca.